Who the hell are you and what are you doing in this house?
I live here, ma'am.
Bull! I know every face on this street. You don't belong here.
We bought this house 3 weeks ago.
I run this neighborhood. Get out or I'm calling the cops.
Ma'am, please. This is my home.
Then explain that to the police.
She dialed 911 on my front porch. My wife opened the door. One look. Reported my wife as a trespasser in our own living room. The officer went white and whispered,
That's the chief.
My wife is the police chief of Loudoun County. The woman who just called 911 had no idea what she'd started, and what I uncovered next went far deeper than one phone call. My name is Garrett Ellison. I'm 42 years old, and I design landscapes for a living. Custom gardens, stone patios, water features, the kind of work that makes rich people in Northern Virginia feel like they live in a magazine. I run the whole operation from a studio behind my house. Laptop, drawing tablet, and enough plant catalogs to insulate a barn. My wife, Nora, is the reason we moved to Stonebridge Crossing. She'd just been appointed police chief of Loudoun County, the first woman to hold the position. 18 years of Army military police, 2 overseas deployments, a spotless service record, and a handshake from the county supervisor. We found a house 3 miles from headquarters, 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a backyard big enough for what I needed to do next. See, my mother Eleanor passed away 14 months before we moved. Cancer, the quick kind. She left me her rose collection, 22 David Austin heritage bushes, each one named, each one pruned by her hands for over a decade. Desdemona, Gertrude Jekyll, the generous gardener. My mother talked to those roses like they were her 3rd and 4th children. So I dug up every single one and brought them with me, packed them in burlap, drove them 200 miles in a rented trailer, and planted them across the front yard of our new home. It was the only way I knew to keep her close. The first week was fine, quiet. I spent my days getting the roses settled and my evenings unpacking boxes, while Nora worked 12-hour shifts learning the department. Then Rhonda Kessler came over. Rhonda lived 2 houses down, retired nurse, mid-60s. She brought banana bread and a warning wrapped in small talk. "Welcome to Stonebridge," she said, handing me the bread. "Just so you know, Sheila runs this place like it's her personal kingdom. Keep your head down the first few months." I thanked her. I didn't listen. I had roses to tend. I should have listened. Sheila Bancroft was the HOA president, had been since Obama's 2nd term. 56 years old, blonde, built like a woman who jogged once in 2014 and never quite got over it. She drove a white Cadillac Escalade that she navigated through the neighborhood at roughly the speed of a funeral procession, and she dressed like a real estate agent attending a christening. Linen blazer over yoga pants, Gucci sunglasses perched on her head like a tiara she hadn't quite earned. Nobody ran against her because nobody wanted the headache. The 3 other board members, I'd later learn their names, but at the time I called them Nodding Larry, Quiet Sue, and the guy who always looked like he was doing math in his head, voted however Sheila told them to. The HOA bylaws were 94 pages long. I read every word. It was like the Geneva Convention of Lawn Care. Half of it contradicted the other half, and nobody followed any of it, except when Sheila decided someone should. Her husband, Dale, was quieter. Planning commission member for the county, the kind of man who wore short-sleeve dress shirts in July, and spoke in paragraphs so flat they could have been written by a government printer. If Sheila was the blade, Dale was the handle. You'd forget he was there until you realized she never swung without him. I didn't meet Sheila that first week, but I saw the Escalade. It rolled past our house on a Wednesday afternoon, slow enough to read my license plate, windows down just far enough for me to catch a pair of Gucci lenses aimed at my rose beds. She didn't wave, didn't stop, just looked. Then the window slid back up, and the Escalade rolled on like a white shark that had decided I wasn't worth eating yet. The next morning, I found a folded copy of the CC&R tucked under my welcome mat. No note, no name, just the 94 pages and a yellow highlight on section 12.4, exterior modifications. The roses had been in the ground less than a week. The violation notice arrived on a Thursday. White envelope, HOA seal embossed in gold, like it was a letter from the Vatican. Inside, a single page informing me that my front yard rose garden constituted an unauthorized landscaping modification, and that I had 14 days to remove it or face fines of $200 per day. $200 a day for roses. I sat at my kitchen table and read the CC&Rs again. Section 12.4 covered structural exterior modifications. Structural. I design landscapes for a living. I know the difference between a retaining wall and a rose bush. Flowers are not structural. Flowers are the opposite of structural. Flowers are what you plant to make structural things look less ugly. I typed a polite email to the HOA board. Attached my county landscaping permit, 6 photos of the garden from every angle, and the specific CC and RS clause that defines structural modifications. I quoted it word for word. I was thorough. I was professional. I was wasting my time. 3 days later, Sheila replied. One line. The board has reviewed your appeal and finds it without merit. The fine stands. The board, as if there had been a meeting, as if anyone had deliberated, as if nodding Larry and quiet Sue had weighed the constitutional rights of heritage roses and decided, reluctantly, that the flowers had to go. I requested a hearing. The Virginia Property Owners Association Act, that's Section 55.1-1819, for anyone keeping score at home, requires HOAs to give homeowners written notice, an opportunity to be heard, and a formal board vote before levying fines. It's not a suggestion. It's law. And Sheila had skipped every step like a gym class she considered beneath her. The hearing was held in the community room on a Wednesday evening, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The smell of coffee that had been reheated so many times, it had given up on being coffee and settled for being warm brown liquid. Sheila sat at the head of a folding table, like she was presiding over a Senate committee. Dale sat in the corner, scrolling his phone with the enthusiasm of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. The 3 board members flanked Sheila, 3 adults who had apparently traded their spines for committee seats. I presented my case. Permit, photos, CC and RS text, state law. Sheila listened the way a toll booth listens to complaints about highway pricing. She let me finish, then leaned forward and said, Mr. Ellison, this neighborhood has standards. If you can't meet them, perhaps Stonebridge isn't the right fit for your family. Not the right fit. For planting flowers, in my own yard. I looked at the 3 board members. Nodding, Larry nodded. Quiet Sue studied the table. Math guy blinked twice, which I assumed was his version of a standing ovation. Was there a board vote authorizing this fine? I asked. Sheila paused. Not long, but long enough. The board's decision is reflected in the notice you received. That's not what I asked. Was there a recorded vote? Meeting minutes? A quorum present? Dale's phone scrolling stopped. He looked up for the first time, and something behind his eyes shifted. Not panic exactly, but the expression of a man who realizes someone has just tugged on a thread he'd prefer stayed tucked in. Sheila smiled the way a crocodile smiles before it lets you know the water isn't as shallow as you thought. Mr. Ellison, I assure you, everything was handled properly. If you'd like to continue this conversation, you're welcome to retain an attorney. I didn't retain an attorney, not yet. What I did was go home, sit in my studio, and pull up every HOA meeting agenda, every email, every notice I could find from the past 3 years. It took me until 2 in the morning, and what I found, or more accurately, what I didn't find, changed everything. There were no minutes, not for my fine, not for the landscaping rule change Sheila had cited, not for the previous year's budget approval. Sheila Bancroft had been running this HOA the way a poker player runs a friendly home game, making up the rules as she went, and nobody had ever asked to see the deck. Here's what most people don't know about HOA fines in Virginia. If the board didn't follow its own bylaws and state law when issuing a fine, the fine is void. Not reduced, not negotiable, void. Like it never happened. That's not my opinion. That's the Virginia Property Owners Association Act, and it has teeth. I didn't send another email. I just saved every document I'd found, backed it up to the cloud, and went to bed. The roses stayed exactly where they were. 2 weeks after the hearing, the HOA passed a new rule. Effective immediately, no home-based commercial operations shall be conducted within Stonebridge Crossing without prior written approval from the Architectural and Business Review Committee. There was no Architectural and Business Review Committee. Sheila had invented it the way she invented everything, by typing it into a document and assuming nobody would question it. The rule had been added to the CC and Rs exactly 11 days after Sheila learned I worked from home. The ink on the amendment was practically still wet. The committee it referenced had the same number of members as the Loch Ness Monster Appreciation Society, 0. but it sounded official enough to scare someone who didn't know better. The notice gave me 30 days to shut down my studio or face fines of $500 per day. $500. For drawing garden designs on a tablet in a room that shared a wall with my laundry. I checked the county zoning ordinance. Loudoun County allows home-based businesses as long as the workspace doesn't exceed 25% of the home's square footage. My studio was 18%. I was under the limit by a margin wide enough to park Sheila's Escalade in. But here's where it got interesting. I filed for a business license renewal, a routine process I'd done every year for a decade. Simple form, small fee, rubber stamp. Except this time, the county planning office sent it back with a note. Application held pending completion of environmental impact assessment. An environmental impact assessment for a laptop and a drawing tablet. I called the planning office. The clerk sounded apologetic, in the way government employees sound apologetic when they know something is ridiculous but can't say so. It was flagged by a commission member, she said. I'm not able to tell you who. She didn't have to. Dale Bancroft sat on the Loudoun County Planning Commission. Dale, who had the charisma of a parking meter and the ethics to match, had reached across the counter of his own government office and slapped a bureaucratic speed bump on my livelihood. Not because my studio posed any environmental risk, but because his wife needed a second front in her war against my rose garden. I printed the 47-page environmental impact assessment form. 47 pages. For a man who draws pictures of flower beds. The form asked about chemical runoff, noise pollution levels, potential habitat disruption, and, I am not making this up, projected impact on local migratory bird patterns. I designed patios. The only birds I impact are the ones who land on them. The form sat on my desk for 3 days. I stared at it every morning while drinking coffee, and every morning it stared back with the blank indifference of a document that knew it had no reason to exist. Then I did something simple. I pulled up the Stonebridge Crossing homeowner directory and started making calls. Friendly calls. Just checking in. How long have you lived here? Do you work from home? Anybody ever mention an architectural and business review committee to you? It took an afternoon. I found 3. Candace Whitfield ran an Etsy shop out of her guest bedroom. Custom candles, apparently quite popular. Never received a notice. Never heard of any committee. Doug Emmerich tutored high school students from his basement 3 evenings a week. Nothing. Pam Salazar had run her real estate business from a home office for 6 years. Not a single letter. 3 home businesses. 0 enforcement actions. The only person who'd been targeted was me. When I brought this up at the next board meeting, casual, like I was just curious, Sheila's answer was a masterclass in creative deflection. Those situations are being reviewed on a case-by-case basis, she said, which is what people say when they have no basis and no case. Dale, for his part, had stopped scrolling his phone and adopted a new hobby, staring at the middle distance like a man who could see his pension disappearing over the horizon. I went home that night and added 3 new sticky notes to the wall in my studio. Yellow for Candace, blue for Doug, green for Pam. 3 data points that proved what I was starting to suspect. This was never about roses or studios or environmental impacts. This was about a woman who had confused authority with ownership, and a husband who used a government desk to help her keep the illusion alive. The environmental impact assessment form went into my filing cabinet, unfilled, right next to the void fine notice and the fabricated committee rule. My studio stayed open, my roses kept growing, and Sheila Bancroft kept driving past my house at funeral procession speed, convinced she was winning. She was not winning. The 3rd escalation came on a Saturday evening, and it came with blue lights. Nora and I were in the backyard with Rhonda. Nothing dramatic, just 3 adults, a charcoal grill, and a disagreement about whether burgers should be flipped once or twice. The coals were glowing orange, the air smelled like hickory and ground beef, and the Virginia dusk had that golden quality that makes even a subdivision look like a painting. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about Sheila Bancroft. Then, the doorbell rang. I walked through the house and opened the front door to 2 uniformed officers I hadn't seen before. Not Officer Pratt. 2 new guys. Young. Nervous. Sir, we received a report of a domestic disturbance at this address. A domestic disturbance. While we were grilling burgers. There's no disturbance, I said. We're having a barbecue. You're welcome to check. The taller officer leaned slightly to his left, trying to see past me into the house. That's when Nora appeared behind my shoulder. She was wearing a faded army t-shirt and flip-flops. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like any other woman enjoying a Saturday cookout. She didn't look like a police chief. That was the point. "Officers," she said, and pulled her badge from her back pocket, the way other people pull out a wallet. "Chief Ellison, Loudoun County PD." The effect was immediate. The tall one straightened like someone had plugged him into a wall socket. The shorter one opened his mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. A sequence I've seen in fish and rarely in humans. "Ma'am, Chief, we apologize. The caller didn't—" "I know who the caller is," Nora said. She said it quietly, which was worse than if she'd shouted. Nora has a way of dropping her voice when she's angry that makes strong men suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. "File the full report. I want the caller's number traced, the dispatch recording preserved, and the incident documented with your shift supervisor before end of watch." They left, quickly. Rhonda was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching through the glass with an expression I couldn't quite read. When I came back, she set down her iced tea and said, "She did the same thing to the Hadleys." "What?" "Tom and Beth Hadley lived on Birch Court 3 years ago." Rhonda's voice was flat now, like she was reciting facts she'd rehearsed but never said out loud. "Sheila called the police on them 6 times in 4 months. Noise complaints, suspicious vehicles, a welfare check because she told dispatch Beth seemed confused and might be off her medication. Beth was a kindergarten teacher. She was reading on her porch. 6 calls, 4 months, until a family sold their house and left. "Why didn't anyone say something?" I asked. Rhonda looked at me with the tired patience of someone who'd already asked that question 100 times. "Because Sheila owns this neighborhood the way a casino owns a poker table. The house always wins. People figured it was easier to fold than to fight." I sat on the back porch long after Rhonda left. The coals had gone gray. The crickets had taken over, filling the darkness with a sound so thick it felt like a wall. Nora sat beside me, still in her army shirt, scrolling through something on her phone. "That's the second false report," she said without looking up. "I know. In Virginia, filing a false police report is a Class 1 misdemeanor. Section 18.2-461, up to 12 months in jail and a $2,500 fine, per count." "I know that too." She looked at me. "Then you know this isn't an HOA problem anymore." She was right. Sheila Bancroft had graduated from HOA tyrant to serial false report filer, and business was booming. She'd weaponized the police department the way other people weaponize Yelp reviews, casually, repeatedly, and with the absolute confidence of someone who had never once faced a consequence. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I wasn't going to fight Sheila Bancroft. Fighting implies 2 people swinging at each other. What I was going to do was quieter, slower, and far more permanent. I was going to dismantle her, not with anger, not with lawyers, not with shouting matches at board meetings. I was going to take apart Sheila Bancroft's little empire the same way you take apart a bad garden. Carefully, methodically, root by root, until there was nothing left but clean soil and the faint smell of something that used to be there. The roses, by the way, were doing beautifully. The FOIA request took 11 days. I filed it on a Monday morning. Virginia Code Section 2.2-3700, the Freedom of Information Act. Any citizen can request public records, police dispatch logs, 911 call recordings, incident reports. The cost is usually a few dollars for photocopies. The process is straightforward, and the results in this case were devastating. The county clerk's office sent me a flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop at 10 in the evening, expecting maybe a dozen records. What I got was a spreadsheet. 34 calls, all from the same phone number, Sheila Bancroft's personal cell, spread across 9 years and 7 different households in Stonebridge Crossing. I sat in my studio at 2 in the morning, scrolling through the records, and the picture that emerged was so precise it could have been drawn with a ruler. Every family followed the same pattern. First call, something vague. Suspicious activity, unfamiliar vehicle. Second call, slightly more serious. Noise disturbance, possible trespassing. Third and fourth calls, escalation. Welfare check, domestic concern. By the 5th call, the family was looking at real estate listings. 7 families targeted. 4 sold their homes and left. The Hadleys, the Morrisons, the Suarezes, the Penningtons. Not one of Sheila's 34 calls had ever resulted in a single arrest, a single citation, or a single verified complaint. Every single one was a ghost, designed not to catch criminals, but to exhaust people until they gave up and moved. Then I pulled the property records. Every house sold by those 4 families had been purchased by the same buyer, a limited liability company called Ridgecrest Holdings LLC. I looked up the LLC's registered agent, Chet Bancroft, Dale's younger brother. Chet bought the Hadley house for $60,000 under market value, held it for 7 months, sold it at a $42,000 profit. The Morrison house, $51,000 under market, flipped for $38,000 profit. Same pattern with the Suarezes and the Penningtons. Sheila called the cops until families broke. Chet swooped in with lowball offers. Dale sat on the planning commission, making sure no one asked uncomfortable questions about zoning or permits. It was a family business. The product was fear. The margins were excellent. I dug deeper. The HOA's financial records, which I'd requested under the same FOIA filing, showed 9 years of payments to Bancroft Landscaping LLC, $47,000 in grounds maintenance contracts. No competitive bidding process, no detailed invoices, no before and after photos, just checks written to a company owned by the brother of the man married to the woman signing the checks. I pulled the broader administrative expenses, another $23,000 in administrative consulting fees, with no documentation, no contracts, no deliverables. Total missing, $70,000. The clock on my laptop read 2:47 a.m. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago. The studio smelled like printer toner and old paper. Around me, spread across every flat surface, were 9 years of records that told a single story. Sheila Bancroft had been running a harassment-to-profit pipeline, and she'd been doing it long enough to believe it was a birthright. I called Nora. She was still at the station. "It's not just bullying," I said. "She's running a racket." 5 seconds of silence. I could hear the hum of the dispatch room behind her. "Then we do this the right way," she said. "Every step documented, every move by the book, no shortcuts." I hung up, saved every file, backed everything to 3 separate cloud drives. The roses outside my window were dark shapes against the porch light. My mother would have liked them in this light, just outlines and the faint sweetness of something blooming in the dark, growing stronger while no one was watching. I spent the next 6 weeks building a case the way I build a garden, layer by layer, from the ground up, with nothing visible from the surface, until everything was ready to bloom at once. The witnesses came first. I tracked down the 4 families Sheila had driven out. Tom Hadley was the easiest. He'd moved 30 miles west to a smaller house in Purcellville and had been stewing about it ever since. When I called and explained what I'd found, he didn't hesitate. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to finally fight back," he said. His wife Beth got on the extension and added, "We'll sign whatever you need." The Morrisons took longer. They'd moved to Fredericksburg and wanted to forget. But when I showed them the FOIA records, when they saw that their family was one of 7, that the pattern was documented, that the same LLC had bought their home at a discount, they agreed. Sworn affidavits from all 4 families, notarized, time-stamped, detailed. Then the money. I hired Phil Meacham, forensic accountant, former IRS auditor who now freelanced for law firms and looked like the kind of man who got genuinely excited about spreadsheet formulas. Phil had a habit of whistling softly when he found something interesting, and by the end of his first afternoon with the HOA books, he sounded like a tea kettle. "This isn't sloppy," he told me, tapping his pen against a printout. "This is deliberate. They didn't even try to hide it. They just assumed nobody would ever look." Phil's report ran 23 pages, 47,000 in landscaping contracts with no competitive bids, 23,000 in consulting fees with no contracts. Total unaccounted expenditure, $70,000 over 9 years. Every dollar traceable to entities controlled by Chet or Dale Bancroft. Phil signed the report and offered to testify. I got the impression he'd been waiting his whole career for books this beautifully corrupt. Nora couldn't investigate Sheila herself. Conflict of interest. You don't investigate the woman who filed false reports against your own household using your own department. So she did the proper thing. She referred the case to the Virginia Attorney General's Office, Civil Rights Division, with a cover memo that read like a legal filing and hit like a truck. Investigator Carla Voss was assigned within a week. Voss was mid-40s, no nonsense, and had the demeanor of someone who had seen enough government corruption to be neither surprised nor patient about it. She reviewed the FOIA records, the affidavits, and Phil's financial report. Then she opened a formal investigation. I installed 6 security cameras around our property, audio-enabled, cloud-backed, 24-hour recording. 2 on the front porch covering the driveway and the rose garden. 2 on the side yard. 2 on the back patio. Every angle covered. Every conversation captured. Virginia is a one-party consent state for recordings, which means as long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, and that person was always going to be me, everything captured was admissible. Here's something most homeowners don't know. Under Virginia FOIA, any citizen can request 911 call logs, police dispatch records, and property transfer documents. The cost is minimal, usually just a few dollars for copies. The information is public, and in the right hands, it turns a bully's pattern from invisible to undeniable. If you're dealing with a neighbor or an HOA president who keeps calling the cops for no reason, FOIA is your best friend. File it. Follow the paper trail. The pattern will speak for itself. I requested a full audit of every HOA vote conducted in the past 5 years. Cross-reference them against meeting minutes, or more accurately, against the absence of meeting minutes. 60% of the fines, rule changes, and enforcement actions Sheila had issued had no corresponding board vote, no quorum, no minutes, no signatures. She'd been governing by decree, and the 3 board members had been too comfortable or too afraid to say otherwise. I pinned everything to the wall in my studio. Sticky notes, color-coded, yellow for financial fraud, blue for false reports, green for procedural violations, red for the families. A timeline stretching 9 years across the drywall. Planning a takedown while your wife is literally the police chief has a certain poetry to it, like being married to the fire department while someone keeps playing with matches next door. The matches were about to run out. Dale found out about the FOIA request on a Thursday. I know because he called me at 6:14 p.m., which is the exact time a man calls when he's spent the day being nervous and finally decided that a threat disguised as friendly advice is his best remaining play. Mr. Ellison. His voice was flatter than usual, which was impressive given that his usual voice already had the emotional range of a tax form. I understand you've been making some inquiries. Public records, I said. It's a beautiful system. Anyone can use it. You're making a very big mistake. This neighborhood has a long memory. I was recording, of course. One-party consent. The phone was on speaker, the voice memo running, and Dale Bancroft was threading words together that would sound extremely interesting to a state investigator. Dale, I said, are you threatening me? I'm advising you, as a neighbor. Noted. Have a good evening. He hung up. I saved the file, labeled it Bancroft_D_threat_advisory, and added it to the growing archive on my cloud drive. Dale's idea of subtle intimidation had all the finesse of a man trying to whisper while standing on a bullhorn. The next move was Sheila's. She called an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda, printed on letterhead that I swear used the font size reserved for papal encyclicals, read, Review of the Ellison family's compliance status and potential assessment of enhanced penalties. Enhanced penalties. As if the existing imaginary penalties weren't already imaginary enough. The meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the community room. Same fluorescent lights. Same coffee that tasted like it had been through therapy and come out worse. 12 residents showed up, which was 10 more than usual. Word was getting around. Sheila had prepared a presentation. I use the word presentation loosely. It was more like a collage of grievances assembled by someone who had confused being organized with being right. Photos of my rose garden taken at unflattering angles, a screenshot of my business website, a printed copy of a county zoning map with my address circled in red marker, as if my studio were a biohazard site and not a room where a man drew pictures of Japanese maples. She stood at the front of the room, laser pointer in hand. Yes, a laser pointer. And walked the audience through her case with the conviction of a woman who genuinely believed she was performing a public service. The Ellisons, she said, tapping the screen, have demonstrated a consistent pattern of non-compliance with community standards. I waited until she finished. Then I raised my hand. Mrs. Bancroft, can you show me the board vote that authorized these fines? The room didn't go quiet. It went still. There's a difference. Quiet is just the absence of sound. Still is when people stop breathing because they realize something is about to happen. Sheila smiled. The board's decisions are documented in our records. Then you can produce the minutes? Our administrative processes are, and the meeting minutes from when the home business ban was adopted. The one that created the Architectural and Business Review Committee. Her smile developed a hairline crack. The laser pointer drifted to the ceiling and stayed there, a tiny red dot circling the acoustic tile like a confused firefly. Dale, in the back row, had stopped breathing. I could tell because his chest wasn't moving, and his complexion had shifted from bored bureaucrat to man who just remembered he left the oven on. Then something happened that I did not expect. Linda Pruitt, board member number 3, the one I had mentally filed as Math Guy's wife, spoke up. For the first time in 4 years. "Sheila," she said, and her voice had the cautious quality of someone diffusing an explosive she hadn't been trained to handle. "He has a point. Do we actually have minutes for that vote?" Sheila turned to Linda with an expression that could have curdled cream at 40 paces. "Linda, this isn't the time to undermine the board." The meeting ended shortly after. Sheila gavelled it closed, with the urgency of a woman who had suddenly discovered the floor was lava. People shuffled out. Dale left through a side door. The fluorescent light above the projector flickered twice and went dark, which felt less like an electrical issue and more like the building's editorial comment. Linda Pruitt caught me in the parking lot. She was clutching her car keys the way you clutch a railing on a roller coaster, tight, with both hands, and with the clear understanding that something was accelerating. "I've been on this board for 4 years, she said, "and I've never once seen a proper vote. She just tells us what we decided." I thanked her. I meant it. The crack in Sheila's kingdom had just become a door. When Sheila Bancroft realized the ground beneath her was shifting, she did what every cornered autocrat does. She went bigger. She skipped the HOA entirely and called Warren Fitch, county council member, District 3, the man whose signature sat on half the county's zoning approvals and whose office wall was decorated with photos of himself shaking hands at ribbon cuttings. Sheila filed a formal complaint alleging that Police Chief Nora Ellison was using her position to shield her household from legitimate HOA enforcement actions and intimidate community volunteers. Community volunteers. That's what Sheila called herself, a community volunteer. The woman who'd been running a harassment to profit scheme for 9 years had rebranded herself as a PTA mom who just wanted the neighborhood to look nice. Warren Fitch called Nora in for a meeting. It was professional, brief, and exactly the kind of political theater that makes county government feel like a daytime soap opera with worse lighting. Nora sat across from Fitch in his office and laid out the facts. She had recused herself from every matter involving Stonebridge Crossing. She had personally referred the false police report investigation to the state attorney general's office, and every action taken had been documented, time-stamped, and reviewed by the county legal counsel. Fitch listened, reviewed the documentation, dismissed the complaint. He did it with the practiced efficiency of a man who recognized a losing horse and had no intention of betting on it. But Sheila wasn't done. She had another weapon, the press. She called the Loudoun Times-Mirror with an anonymous tip, though anonymous is a generous word for a tip that arrived from a phone number the newsroom had on file from 6 previous attempts to plant stories. The tip alleged that the county's new police chief was using her badge to protect her husband from HOA accountability. The reporter assigned to the story was Kyle Drummond, mid-30s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of journalist who still carried a notepad instead of relying on his phone, which either made him charmingly old-fashioned or deeply paranoid about battery life. Kyle called me on a Wednesday afternoon and asked if I'd like to comment. "Come over," I said. "I'll make lemonade." Kyle sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours. I showed him everything. The FOIA records, all 34 calls, the property transfer documents, Phil Meacham's forensic accounting report, the sworn affidavits from 4 families, the void fines, the fabricated committee, the environmental impact assessment for a drawing tablet. Kyle took notes the way surgeons take stitches, precise, methodical, and with the focus of someone who understood that every detail mattered. He asked sharp questions. He cross-referenced dates. He read Phil's report twice. When he was done, he set down his pen and looked at me over his glasses. "Mr. Ellison," he said, "this isn't a story about a police chief's conflict of interest. This is a story about a 9-year harassment campaign." Then he told me something I hadn't expected. "She's contacted me before, twice, both times with tips about other residents. Neither story held up. I poured him more lemonade. My mother's recipe: sugar, fresh lemons, a pinch of salt that most people skip but makes all the difference. What were the stories about? The Morrisons and the Penningtons, two of the four families that had been driven out. Sheila hadn't just called the police on them. She'd tried to weaponize the media too. The press was supposed to be the second barrel of the shotgun. Call the cops to exhaust them, then plant stories to humiliate them. A 1-2 punch designed for people who couldn't punch back. She'd gone to the press expecting a scandal, and accidentally delivered the reporter his best story of the year. Just not the one she had in mind. Kyle left at dusk. I stood on the porch watching his car pull out of the driveway, and I noticed the roses along the front walkway had started their second bloom. Desdemona was leading, soft peach petals catching the last of the light, fragrant enough that you could smell them from the porch steps. My mother would have deadheaded the spent blooms by now, but I'd left them. There was something satisfying about letting things finish on their own timeline. Sheila was so used to controlling the narrative that she'd forgotten narratives have a way of controlling you back. She'd spent 9 years writing everyone else's story. She just didn't realize that someone was finally writing hers. The lemonade pitcher was empty. The sticky notes on my studio wall were full. And somewhere in Richmond, investigator Carla Voss was reading a very interesting file. The annual HOA meeting was held on the first Saturday of October, which felt appropriate because October is the month when things that have been growing all summer finally show what they've become. The community room had 60 folding chairs. They set up 80. Then they brought in 20 more from the storage closet. 120 residents showed up, 3 times the usual attendance. Word had spread through the neighborhood the way all good gossip spreads in Virginia suburbs, quickly, through group texts, and with just enough detail to make everyone cancel their evening plans. Sheila noticed the crowd but didn't flinch. She dressed for the occasion. New blazer, fresh blowout, earrings that caught the fluorescent light like tiny chandeliers. She opened the meeting the way she always did. Budget report, landscaping schedule, pool hours, a reminder about recycling bins. She was performing normalcy the way a magician performs misdirection. Look at the ordinary things while the extraordinary ones were already in motion. I waited. She moved through old business, new business, and was about to call for adjournment when I stood up. I'd like to address the membership under new business. That's not on the agenda, Mr. Ellison. Virginia Code Section 55.1-1823 requires homeowners to be heard on matters affecting the community. This qualifies. She stared at me. I stared back. 120 people held their breath. The fluorescent light above us buzzed with the nervous energy of a fixture that sensed it was about to witness something significant. "You have 5 minutes," she said. I didn't need 5 minutes. I needed 14. I'd brought my laptop and connected it to the community room projector, the same projector Sheila had used to display unflattering photos of my roses. Now it displayed something else entirely. Slide 1, a timeline. 9 years, 34 documented 911 calls, all from the same phone number. Each call plotted against the date the targeted family eventually sold their home. The room shifted, not a gasp, more like the sound of 100 people simultaneously adjusting their understanding of reality. Slide 2, the property records. 7 families targeted, 4 homes sold below market value. Everyone purchased by Ridgecrest Holdings LLC, registered agent Chet Bancroft. Each home resold within 12 months at a profit ranging from $31,000 to $48,000. Slide 3. Phil Meacham's forensic accounting summary. $70,000 in HOA funds paid to Bancroft-controlled entities. No competitive bidding, no documentation, no board approval. Slide 4. The affidavits. I played a 30-second video clip. Tom Hadley, sitting in his living room in Purcellville, looking directly into the camera. She called the police on my wife while she was gardening, 3 times in 1 month. We sold our house at a $40,000 loss because we couldn't take it anymore. The room was silent now, not the polite silence of people waiting their turn. The heavy silence of people who had just learned that the woman running their neighborhood had been running something else entirely. Sheila stood up. Her face had passed through several distinct phases: surprise, calculation, anger, and had settled on the expression of a woman who believed that volume could substitute for evidence. "This is slander," she said. "This is a coordinated attack. I'm calling my attorney." "You might want to call a different kind of attorney, Mrs. Bancroft." The double doors at the back of the community room opened. Investigator Carla Voss walked in first. Navy suit, state ID badge on a lanyard. Behind her, a second investigator from the Attorney General's office. Behind them, 2 Loudoun County Sheriff's deputies who had been waiting in the parking lot for a signal that had just been given. Voss approached the front table with the practiced calm of someone who had done this many times and never enjoyed it. Sheila Bancroft. Dale Bancroft. We have warrants for your arrest. The handcuffs made a sound, a small, precise click that carried across the silent room like a period at the end of a very long sentence. 7 counts of filing false police reports, conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement of homeowners association funds, misuse of public office. Sheila was escorted past my row. Her perfume, that same suffocating department store sweetness, trailed behind her like a ghost of everything she used to be. She didn't look at me. Dale followed, escorted by the second deputy, his face carrying the resigned blankness of a man who had always known this day would come and had done nothing to prevent it. Rhonda Kessler was crying softly in the back row. Not sad tears, the kind of tears that come when something you've carried for a long time is finally set down. The fluorescent light above the projector flickered twice, then it held steady. 14 minutes of PowerPoint. 9 years of tyranny. 1 pair of handcuffs. Meeting adjourned. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Sheila took a plea deal in February. 7 counts of filing false police reports. 18 months of supervised probation. 400 hours of community service. A permanent ban from holding any HOA office in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And restitution, $34,000, split among the 4 families she'd driven out. Dale was removed from the Planning Commission before the indictment was even finalized. His resignation letter was 2 sentences long and contained the word personal 3 times, which was 2 more times than Dale had ever been personal about anything. He was fined $45,000 and placed on 2 years probation for misuse of public office. Chet Bancroft's situation was simpler and more expensive. A civil judgment required him to disgorge the profits from the 4 property flips, a total of $178,000. The judge used the word disgorge in the ruling, which is a legal term that means give it back, but sounds like something that happens to a snake that swallowed something it shouldn't have. Fitting. Kyle Drummond's article ran on the front page of the Loudoun Times-Mirror. The headline, HOA President Arrested After 9-Year Harassment Campaign. It was shared 11,000 times in the first week. The comment section was a museum of stored-up neighborhood rage from across 3 counties. The HOA held a special election in March. Rhonda Kessler ran unopposed and won by a vote of 93-0, which was both a landslide and a commentary on how badly the neighborhood wanted someone in charge who didn't treat the presidency like a monarchy. Rhonda's first act, void every fine Sheila had issued without a proper board vote. Her second act, hire an independent auditor to review the past decade of HOA finances. Her third act, install a suggestion box in the community room, which was the most radical thing anyone had done with that room since Sheila had installed herself in it. Tom Hadley moved back, bought a house on Maple Court, 2 streets over from his old address. His wife Beth planted a garden the first week. Nobody said a word about it. The Morrisons came back too, not to Stonebridge, but to a neighborhood 1 town over, close enough to matter. I used a portion of the civil settlement to establish the Stonebridge Welcome Fund, a legal assistance program for homeowners facing HOA overreach anywhere in Loudoun County, free consultations, template FOIA requests, a Know Your Rights guide written in language that actual humans can understand. The fund launched in April and had 42 inquiries in its first month. The roses had their best season yet. Desdemona bloomed twice. Gertrude Jekyll put out canes so thick I had to add a second trellis. The generous gardener climbed the porch railing and reached the gutter, which my mother would have considered showing off, but I considered a victory lap. I planted a new bush that spring, a variety called Munstead Wood, deep crimson, almost black at the center, with a fragrance like blackberries and old wood. I planted it in the front corner of the yard, where the morning light hits first and the soil is richest. I named it Eleanor. Nora and I sat on the porch one evening in late May. The air smelled like roses and fresh-cut grass, and the particular sweetness that Virginia evenings get when the humidity drops just enough to remind you why people live here. The streetlights were coming on, one by one, down Ridgecrest Lane. Somewhere a kid was bouncing a basketball. Somewhere else a screen door banged shut. "You know what your mother would say about all this?" Nora asked. "She'd say the roses needed more mulch." Nora smiled. She'd also say you did good. My mother always said roses need two things: good soil and a little bit of fight. Turns out, so do neighborhoods. If you've ever lived under an HOA president who treated your home like her personal property, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. You are not alone, and you are not powerless. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now would be a good time. Because next week, we've got a story about an HOA president who tried to ban a veteran's American flag from his own front yard. She didn't know he'd fought in 2 wars and had a Supreme Court ruling in his back pocket. You're going to want to be here for that one.
Here's what I want you to take away from Garrett's story. Shirley Bancroft didn't lose because she was mean. Plenty of mean people get away with it for decades. She lost because she was predictable. 34 counts, same tactic, same number, same pattern for 9 years. That predictability, that arrogant gives at consistency, turned her own action into the evidence that brought her down. Garrett won because he did the boring work. He fight the fire, he read the financial, he tracked down the families she'd driven down and asked them to put their names on paper. None of that is glamorous, but it adds up to something a bully can't argue with. A paper trail so clean it practically prosecutes itself. If someone thinks they own your neighborhood, remember this: you don't need to be louder, you need to be more patient. Document everything, save every email, fight every fire.